Sports Bunnies podcast. I'm Lorraine.
And I'm Abby. Episode 1's title is The Reality of Being a Girl in Sports.
As girls involved in sports ourselves, we thought we'd take the time to share the sports we play and our favorite sports to watch.
I'll go first. I play soccer, and my favorite sport to watch is hockey.
And I play basketball and softball, and my favorite sport to watch is basketball.
Now that you know a little bit about us, let's get started with our first topic, media coverage.
So, we watch a lot of sports on TV, and mainly we see men's sports being televised, and that women aren't getting the same opportunities as men are. I think you feel the same way, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's evolved over the years, but it's just still not, it's not even close to equal, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, out of the 30 years that women's sports have been nationally televised, they're still receiving the same amount of coverage they did in the 80s. With that coverage, it's always lower technical quality, production value than men's sports, and that's why people don't want to watch. People don't want to see lower quality camera footage. They don't want to see lower quality audio. They want to see the best of the best, and women's sports don't get that.
And it's also sometimes, a lot of the time, it's not even on, ESPN. It'll be on something else. I know that the National Women's Hockey League was only televised for their playoffs this year, and they were just on Twitch, the whole regular season. That needs to change.
Yeah, I was looking in 2019, ESPN SportsCenter totaled that 5.4% of coverage of women's athletes out of all stories were reported on news and headlines, in comparison to the 5% in 1989. That's only a 0.4% increase in almost 30 years.
That's insane.
And the only widely televised women's sporting event is the World Cup. Other than that, when you take the World Cup out of that consideration, only 3.5% of sports coverage was women's sports.
Yeah, I feel like when men are asked about women's sports, the first thing they'll come up with is obviously the historic, World Cup run of the women's team, their dynasty throughout the last, century, this current century from the 2000s on, and maybe the WNBA, but other than that, nothing else is really televised at all. So that's all they can think of when you ask them. That's just really sad.
Yeah, and that deprives young girls in sports of female athletic role models. Even now when a female athlete does something amazing, it's not really talked about their accomplishment. It's talked about them being wives, being mothers. You don't see when Steph Curry hits, gets the 3-point record, that they don't talk about the fact that he has daughters or he's a husband. That's not what's mentioned. It's focused on the game. That's not the reality for women's sports.
Yeah, a lot of NBA players especially too will prioritize their families, and they like to talk about their families online, but media coverage is, journalists don't even ask about really families that often. I'm sure players would be proud to tell the audience about the females in their family, and when I do ask about them, they get more media coverage than women's athletes, which is also really sad.
Yeah, the focus isn't even on their achievements. For women, it's on their personal lives. It's discouraging for young girls to watch.
We can move on to our next category now, influences and statistics. So we talked about influences a little bit and how there's a lack of, very much so, because of the media coverage that has not been given to any young girls. So young girls don't get those influences nearly as much as men can look up to, Steph Curry, any male superstar athlete.
Yeah, I mean, even growing up, I had to seek out finding professional athletes that were women. Male athletes are always in the media. They're always talked about. Their accomplishments are talked about in every context.
Mhm.
Female athletes don't get that. And I know that being a young girl playing sports, more young girls need to realize that there are strong women competing at high levels, and it's possible for them too. It's not something that is a rarity. It's can be a reality.
Yeah, only 12% of sports news is presented by females. The need for female role models more than ever right now. I mean, it's increased quite a bit, but still, only 12% of sports news. Like, that is a lot of sports news, and you rarely see females. Like, you'll see females on the broadcast if it's Mother's Day, if it's, International Women's Day, but that's really the only occasion where you see a dominated female broadcast team. Most of the time, it's females are just the anchors, just reading off a script. But there are tons of aspiring, like myself, like sports journalists that know a lot about sports and want to get into the sports world, and our talents aren't like to be seen by major, sports companies like ESPN. Like, their broadcast female team is not much. It's sad.
Yeah, and most of the female sports reporters you see are former female athletes, professional athletes. Like for the WNBA, a lot of their broadcasting is done by Rebecca Lobo, who played in the WNBA. And even that, like it's women's sports and there's a woman talking about it, which is great because that's more representation for females. But she got there because of her ability to play, not because of her ability to be a reporter. Other girls who have dreams of working in sports need to be given the chance that men do. I think we can move on.
All right.
Just before we do, I just want to mention a few things. So, we're talking about female athlete opportunity, and we were talking about in the broadcasting and the journalism sense, but I just want to highlight some things about opportunity to play professional sports. In the WNBA, there are 12 teams. Each team can have up to 12 players on the active roster, meaning there's only 144 active roster spots in the WNBA, as opposed to 30 NBA teams with 450 active roster spots. There are only 6 teams in the PHL, which is professional women's hockey. 144 roster spots, as opposed to 32 NHL teams with 736 roster spots. In 2020, 504,619 athletes competed in the NCAA. 281,999 of those were male, and 222,920 were female.
Yeah, I mean, like, when you look at the NCAA specifically, it's like, I mean, especially for, March Madness, this year specifically, it's definitely, there's been an increase in coverage with male and female, and for the first time, like, people have done female brackets as well as male brackets for the March Madness, but it's just so sad that male athletes from the NCAA are given they have a much higher chance of making it to the professional level, and to talk about salaries too, like they'll be given way bigger salaries than females if and the rare occurrence that a female goes on to play professional level at whatever sport they are, salaries, male athletes, even if they end up in the minors their whole careers, they can live off of those salaries, and there's a ton of athletes from the minor leagues that live off those salaries. The females, even the highest athletes, have to work a second job along with playing their sport professionally.
So now more than ever, we're seeing a presence of women in any sort of athletic sense, sports journalism, actually competing, and that's amazing. It's starting in the youth levels, going up through high school, going up through college, even into professional now. And that wasn't the reality a while ago. We're seeing so many more men talk about female athletes, especially in the college level right now. We have Aaliyah Boston from South Carolina, who is a dominant basketball player who could probably hang with some of the NBA players if she was put up against them. She's amazing. And people are noticing. People are talking about her. And Paige Beckers from UConn. She's crazy good. She's been compared to Curry. People need to realize that. And it's more up and coming. In the last couple of years, we're hearing more about female athletes and their accomplishments, which is going in the right direction.
Yeah, and to add on to that list of names of amazing women athletes who are being compared to superstar male athletes, I know what can be known as, and I will call her this, Marie Philippe Poulin, for Team Canada, the hockey player. Um, she was offered an ECHL contract to play with the men because she's so dominant. She led Canada to their gold medal this past winter and so many other amazing accomplishments. But she turned down the offer to promote more about women's sports, and I think that is a huge thing for women's hockey, especially now that it's on the upward trend with the NWHL, National Women's Hockey League. Um, they're adding more teams now, and they doubled their salary by a lot. So the promotion of women's sports by the most known female hockey player, is very huge for the future of women's sports.
Yeah, I mean, even in like the WNBA, you talk about Brianna Stewart, who was a four-time NCAA championship winner, four-time MVP with UConn from 2012 to 2016, and Sue Bird, who was dominant in UConn in the 90s. These players are constantly being talked about. They're being acknowledged by players in the NBA. You see, especially Curry, especially Kyrie, they're constantly talking about these female athletes and promoting them. And that's what needs to happen. They need to support each other. And the female athletes are always supporting the male athletes, and the male athletes are starting to catch on and they're starting to support the female athletes too. And I think that is just making the future brighter for all female athletes at any level.
Yeah, we're just trying to focus more on how bright the future is looking for female sports instead of the statistics, because the more promotion we get by these male athletes is just huge for the future of women's sports. Roster spots, and we're just trying to make more room for females in sports, no matter, even if it's athletes, if it's sports journalists, if it's photographers, broadcasters, whatever it is. I think the future is looking pretty bright. I hope we can take a big increase like we did this year, with March Madness and the WNBA and the NWHL raising their salaries and making more teams in these leagues. The more promotion it gets by ESPN and other superstar male athletes, I think the future does look pretty bright for women's sports.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. And like I said, we're going in the right direction.
All right, to close out, to wrap up this episode, we have a message for our male and female listeners.
To our male listeners, absorb the information we have thrown at you and continue to support women's sports platforms, no matter what sport it is, what platform it is, how it's related to sports. Support them like you've been supported, because that's what we need to grow. That's what we need young girls to see.
Equality. And to our female listeners, we empower you, and whatever your sports journey may look like, keep doing your thing.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed and took something out of this. Bye.